One of the aspects of having this channel I'm enjoying the most is interacting with other shrimp keepers, especially new shrimp keepers. And over the last few months, I've received question after question from new shrimp keepers, typically about the same things. And in this video, I want to share with you 5 things I don't think new shrimp keepers should worry about. Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. My name is Richard, and I'm a fish and shrimp breeder based in the UK. Now, if you're new here and you haven't yet checked out my free ebook on Neocaridina shrimp, check out the link in the description. Download yourself a copy. So, I believe there are 5 things new shrimp keepers should not be worrying about. In this video, I'm going to share all 5 with you, but in no particular order. So, the first thing new shrimp keepers often seem to agonize over is, how many shrimp should I start with? Now, in my experience, this really doesn't matter, and I'll explain why. Let's imagine you're setting up your first 5-gallon shrimp tank, and you are trying to decide, do I put in 5 shrimp? Do I put in 7? Should I go for 10? These are all questions I receive on a regular basis. Here's the reality. You put in 5 red cherry shrimp. Let's say there's 3 females and 2 males. In 3 or 4 months' time, if you're looking after those shrimp properly, the chances are you will have 30, 40, 50 shrimp in there. You may even have more. Give it another 3 or 4 months, and you will have hundreds of shrimp in there, assuming you're not removing them or culling them in a different way. The number you start with really doesn't matter. Now, I wouldn't start with 2. You start with 2, you may end up with 2 males. You may end up with 2 females. If you start with 2, the chances of ending up with 1 male and 1 female are slim, unless you've specifically selected those from another batch. The reality is, it does not matter how many you start with. Shrimp have an incredibly small bioload. An individual shrimp doesn't make much of an impact on an aquarium. Assuming you are carrying out your regular water changes, you will find even in the smallest of containers, you can have hundreds and hundreds of shrimp without a problem. In these breeding tubs here, which hold around 25 litres, we can easily have 600, 700, 800 red cherry shrimp when we're building up a colony ready to sell it. The number you start with will have very little bearing on the number you end up with. The next thing I find new shrimp keepers typically agonize over is substrate. There are many people on YouTube and on the wider internet in general who will tell you, unless you have fluval stratum, you're abusing your shrimp. Unless you're using this substrate, your shrimp are all going to die. The reality is, your red cherry shrimp do not care what substrate you're using. In these tanks, we use regular gravel. In this one, we have shrimp in there with the fancy goldfish. It's fluorite black. In the tank behind me, the 155 in the next room, that does use fluval stratum, but that's because it's an aquascape. That had nothing to do with the shrimp. Generally speaking, whatever substrate you choose to use, your red cherry shrimp will do absolutely fine. Now, the only exception I would say here is if you have very soft water. And by soft, we mean very low in dissolved minerals. Red cherry shrimp do like calcium. They do need the minerals in the water to be able to grow properly, to develop properly, and to be able to molt properly. If you have a very soft water with few minerals, in that case you may want to include something like crushed coral or something in your substrate which will help raise the level of dissolved minerals, the levels of dissolved calcium in the water. But other than that, shrimp do not care what you use. If you want to use bright blue, bright green gravel, if you want to use marbles, anything at all, red cherry shrimp don't care. So the third thing I find new red cherry shrimp keepers often wonder about is food. What is the right food to feed to your shrimp? There are some fabulous foods on the market. There are some foods specifically tailored to shrimp, such as the Denale Shrimp King line. The reality is, red cherry shrimp have evolved as detrivores. They will eat anything they come across. In the wild, they would eat dead and decaying plant matter, fish poop, dead fish, dead bugs, other shrimp that have passed away. They will essentially eat and break down anything they come across. In the aquarium, it doesn't really matter what we feed them. Personally, I choose to feed Repashy gel food. So, I choose that food because of the delivery method. It's a cube that I drop into the water and it remains stable for 2 or 3 days before it starts to pollute the water. It doesn't matter if I feed my shrimp Repashy gel food, Tetra crisps, crushed up flake, algae wafers, providing we give them something which has at least the basic elements of a good food, any decent quality fish food will do absolutely fine for red cherry shrimp. In fact, much of the shrimp's time is spent eating bacteria and biofilm and small starts of algae that they find in the tank. I always tell new shrimp keepers, do not stress over which food you're feeding to your red cherry shrimp. Just concentrate on finding a food which has at least basic ingredients and ideally sinks, as they want to eat the food from the bottom of the tank rather than the surface. Don't give them floating goldfish pellets, that's for sure. Now, number 4 on my list of things new shrimp keepers should not worry about is temperature. Red cherry shrimp are incredibly hardy. They can live in a wide range of temperatures, anything from 57 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit, which is around 14 to 30 degrees Celsius, and your red cherry shrimp will be absolutely fine. Now, they do have a sweet spot. If they are kept in the mid 70s degrees Fahrenheit, that is typically where they grow best, where they breed best. But not everybody wants their shrimp to be breeding all the time. Some people just want to enjoy their shrimp in a small nano tank desk setup, for instance. They don't necessarily want hundreds and hundreds of shrimp. In that environment, if the water is in the mid to high 60s, the shrimp will be absolutely fine. I've kept shrimp in discus tanks before that we kept in the low 80s. The shrimp did superb. They live in such a wide temperature range. It's really not something shrimp keepers need to agonize over. These breeding tanks behind me, they're not heated at all. I recently set up a tiny half-gallon vase tank, a half-gallon vase aquarium. That wasn't heated, that was just at room temperature. I only put 4 shrimp in there, and within 2 months the 2 females were buried and would quite happily have multiplied, I have no doubt, had I not have broken that tank down. Temperature is not something we need to stress over. So, the 5th and final item on my list of things new red cherry shrimp keepers should not worry about is algae. So, here's the problem. We are bombarded with the most fantastic aquascapes. When we look on YouTube, aquascapers and shrimp keepers like Chris Loopcup, Oliver Knott, the late great Takeshi Amano, these guys build the most phenomenal displays. I mean, things most of us could never even get close to. But our tanks don't have to look like that. In my opinion, it's a bit like when we look in a magazine and we see celebrities with the most fabulous bodies. We don't have to try and recreate those bodies at home to be fabulous. We don't have to have totally algae-free aquariums for our shrimp to thrive. In fact, algae is incredibly beneficial. Algae helps process the waste that the shrimp give off, or the fish, if you're keeping fish in there, give off. I don't worry about algae growing on the rocks. I don't worry about it growing on the back panes of glass. I don't worry about it growing on any of the side panels that I don't look through. If we're not careful, we can fall into the trap of looking into our shrimp tanks, seeing algae and thinking, that's it, it's a disaster, I need to rip it all out and start afresh. In the fancy goldfish tank next to me here, many of the plant leaves are covered in algae. It doesn't matter. This is not an award-winning aquascape, it's a goldfish tank. Many of my shrimp keeping and breeding tanks, they're not competition tanks, they are for me to enjoy. Now, that doesn't mean I would allow it to become completely swamped with algae, but I certainly don't worry about it. Often on a piece of wood or a rock, you'll see the starts of blackbeard algae. Don't worry about it. If it gets out of hand, pull it off, leave some bits on there. The bits on there will actually process the waste. They'll actually have a healthier tank if it has algae in it than one that's completely clear. Algae is natural in the wild, it's everywhere, and that's because nature knows what it's doing. It creates algae to process waste. Now, I did mention just there that I set up a tiny little half-gallon aquarium as a bit of an experiment to see whether or not I could and what would happen if I did. If you haven't yet seen that video, I'll link to it up here on screen. Otherwise, thanks for watching.